welcome. Thank you for coming, first of all, with your summer schedules and off-season time. I know everybody's got a lot of things they want to do, so I appreciate that you're here. And I think Harley's given you a bit of information about this program. So I'm Sarah Zip, and I am a researcher. I'm from the US originally, but I spent the last 8 years overseas working most recently at the University of Stirling up to your north in Scotland. And now I'm back here and I'm based out of Maryland in the US. And through my research and teaching and advocacy, I've developed a program to help coaches on understanding the menstrual cycle and how they can take that learning to their players to help them sort of take some control and agency over how they can cope with their menstrual cycles. So we'll get into it here. The program I've created is Power to Play Period. And what we're trying to do is create these supportive, inclusive education modules on menstrual health and sport for coaches, athletes, families, and leaders. We're working hard to break down the stigma around menstruation so that people feel open and available to talk about it, to build knowledge so that people have the understanding to talk about periods, and to encourage young girls in particular to listen to their bodies and try to get in tune with what their bodies are doing and what their bodies are telling them that they need to stay healthy. Everything here is evidence-based. I'm really rooted in the research. I took most of my books away, but I could show you my stacks and stacks of books that my teenage daughters call the cringy mom books about periods. So I've read them all so that you don't have to. And I've worked with several partners from around the world. I've got Anna Gurovich on here today. Anna, if you want to say hi.
Hi, happy to be here.
Anna was one of my students at the University of Stirling as a master's student. Now she is at the University of Minnesota. And we also have worked with several partners in the UK, the US, Barbados, Zambia, Switzerland, Sri Lanka, all over. And you can see this is just an amazing team of diverse backgrounds and experiences, from researchers and academics and students to practitioners of all kinds. Sasha down there in the corner, she's the director for anti-doping. So we get all these different perspectives. We worked on several projects as well, all around the UK and the US and other parts of the world. I won't bore you with any more details on that though. So the reason why we're doing this and why we think menstruation matters is that I started recognizing in my research that girls are dropping out of sport. We're losing a lot of girls, particularly between the ages of 11 and 14. We know that sport can provide a lot of benefits to people. We want those girls to have those benefits. And if they're not on the pitch, if they're not on the court, if they're not out there on the track, whatever the running or the field of play is, then they're missing out on those benefits. And we know that girls have different needs. They have different reasons why they're dropping out, different challenges that they face. And one of those is puberty and the menstrual cycle. And what we found overwhelmingly is that both the girls themselves and the coaches are struggling to understand the basics of the menstrual cycle and menstrual health and how it impacts them as athletes. So our goal is to take those girls up here in the top picture and give them every opportunity to become these women competing at the highest levels if they're able to go there, but to at least keep them in the game and keep them playing someday at that World Cup we're going to in a couple of weeks. I know if anybody else is going to the World Cup, drop me a line because we'll be there. And so before we get into some of the details, I like to address sort of how we learn about menstruation. And this is a cartoon that my daughter made a few years ago from her experience learning about menstruation at her primary school in Scotland. So as you can see, the teacher girl is saying, girls, this afternoon we will be learning about the menstrual cycle. The student is confused or worried or scared. The topic of the conversation is about pads and tampons. It's not about what's happening in their body. It's not about how they feel about things. It's more about how to manage their menstrual cycle. We find that that's pretty commonplace. And then, of course, she looks outside and there's a group of boys out there playing football. So I like this message because, the men that are in the audience, and I have some questions that Harley already sent me from men who are coaching, is, they ask a lot of questions about, we don't know what to do. No one ever taught us this. And I want to say from the very beginning is that that's okay. You weren't invited into this conversation. And so whatever questions you have, there's no question too dumb or too embarrassing. This is the place for that. And we want people to ask the questions that they have, because it's important, especially for men who didn't get education about this at all, and even for women who probably didn't get a very in-depth education about this topic. So I mentioned already that the foundation for this is that we see girls dropping out, and here's a couple of the statistics around it. The basic story is that girls drop out at a much higher rate than boys. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just about periods, but periods is an important part. That here's the study. This study from Plan UK has a lot of excellent information. They have a section. It's about all types of experiences of menstruation for adolescents, but they specifically focus on some of the elements that affect sport and PE. 42% say their periods stop them from playing sport at one time or another. Many students don't feel prepared when they start their period. Many students don't understand what's happening to them. So these experiences are pretty similar in different places across the US and the UK and Europe. As we go through, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end in the discussion. I haven't been teaching for a while, so I'm gonna have to save my voice here. And now we're going to talk about some of the details of the menstrual cycle. The main thing to think about here is just the different types of phases. I don't expect anyone to memorize the hormone fluctuations and all of these things. We're going to try to break it down into some very basic ways and provide some practical advice for you. So it's not about memorizing all this stuff. It's about thinking about the different elements of menstruation and how you can help your athletes. Excuse me. An overview just of the female reproductive system. Oh my goodness. I'll let you just take a look at that while I catch my breath. It's important, it's helpful to know some of the language so that we can discuss more in detail. Jeez, hold on. Next point I would like to make is just reminding everyone that for various reasons, not all girls and women menstruate, and not all people who menstruate they identify as girls and women. So we do have transgender, non-binary, and intersex people involved in sport. Hold on, 1 moment. Excuse me. Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. So now we get into some of the details. And it's a busy slide. There's a lot going on here, but we'll focus on these two images. And first of all, thinking about the different hormonal fluctuations. The important ones to remember here are the blue line and the purple line. This happened to me once before a few weeks ago. It'll pass. You can think of estrogen as the good hormone that generally makes people feel better. Progesterone, the purple one, that's the bad one. So here's your menstrual period. Here's your follicular phase directly after. And this is all the luteal phase that leads into the menstruation cycle. Oh my goodness. Anna, I wonder if you would talk to them about this slide for just a couple minutes while I get my breath. Excuse me.
I don't know where
Anna?
she's gone.
Did she go?
I
I'm
can't
so
see her on
sorry.
the list. It's okay.
Okay. This is so frustrating. It's not teaching season, so I'm out of practice. Okay. If I'm whispering, can you still hear me? Because that might help. Does that still work?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
All good.
Very sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So this is a chart I just created, and I've got it available on my website for people to download because I think it gives, in one glance, a lot of information. So if you think of your menstruation cycle, this is day one right here in your menstruation period. Oh my goodness. This is not going to work. Let me go get some tea and I'll be right back. You can just take a moment to look at this slide. honey lemon tea. It's like 20 some degrees out, so it's not really tea weather, but hopefully it will make it work. Can everybody still hear me?
Yep.
Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah,
All
you're
right,
okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yep.
We'll power through. Okay. So the basics around this this diagram shows you, like, here's where the menstrual cycle starts. So day 1 is the first day of your actual bleeding menstrual period. And, the advice I have is, you're preparing for a couple of days of difficult bleeding followed by lighter days. It's important to pack extra menstrual products, get plenty of rest, hydration, and stretching. So, from a coach's perspective, I would encourage you to encourage your players to focus on rest and hydration and nutrition. It's really important during that time. The symptoms during menstruation can vary wildly. You might have some kids that just have a couple of days of light bleeding, maybe some icky, crampy feelings, and that's about it. On the other end of the spectrum, people can have really debilitating bleeding, heavy bleeding, fatigue, pain, cramps, tightness in muscles, all of these other things, other GI sort of digestive problems. And of course, I always like to put those physical symptoms first and then go to the emotional ones, because the hormones do affect your emotional regulation. But it's also when you're already feeling that bad, when you're suffering through pain and cramps and fatigue, that's going to be hard to be in a good mood for anybody. So during menstruation, from these are some of the symptoms that are commonly experienced. And coaches can help and support by things like having menstrual products and encouraging nutrition and hydration. And I think it's important to remember too that you can still exercise, train, and compete on your period. There's nothing that's stopping you from doing that. And I have some examples later to show in terms of having conversations with athletes of sportswomen who have, powered through their periods and done remarkable things. So it doesn't mean that you can't compete, that you can't do well. It just means that you have these other challenges. Now, the good news is right after menstruation finishes, is a really good phase of the cycle called the late follicular. So this whole green first half is called the follicular phase. Oops. Um, and it's sort of the low hormone phase. And the low hormones are actually good in terms of athletic performance. And even during menstruation, your hormones are low and your body is in good condition to perform, except for the bleeding and cramping part. So that's a real downer. But after that, you enter into the late follicular, and this is what there's a lot of different ways, and people say it's spring, summer, fall, winter, these kinds of phases. My favorite is this is the Beyonce phase. And the reason this is the Beyonce phase is because your energy is increased, your body temperature is well regulated, tend to have lower stress hormones, increased sociability, and higher confidence. It's when people are feeling hormonally at their best. And I always try to point this out because we hear so often about menstruation in such a negative way. But when we learn about the whole menstrual cycle, you can start to look for and recognize the good sides. So, those hormones, estrogen in particular, brings us a lot of good things. So during this follicular phase, it's a really good time to do high impact exercising, increasing fitness and strength. Your muscles and your cardiovascular system are all ideally set up to perform well, and you can make even further gains in strength and conditioning during that time. Ovulation is the breaking point, that's the midpoint. So, exactly opposite of menstruation, you have uh, ovulation in between the low hormone and the high hormone phase. Your feelings during ovulation are pretty similar as during the follicular phase. There's still those higher energy levels. The biggest thing to know about ovulation is that is the fertile time of the menstrual cycle. So that is the time when eggs are being distributed to be able to be fertilized. And that's also the time when there's ligament laxity. And we're getting a lot of attention on that right now because of all the ACL tears going on, particularly in football leading up to the World Cup. And there are a lot of studies that show there is a relationship with ACL tears and ovulation. So that's the time when people are most susceptible to those injuries. Now, I would caution on that. That doesn't mean track your cycles and don't compete during ovulation, especially in a sport like football. I mean, you can't avoid it. You've got lateral movements, cutting, jumping, running. Um, those are the things that are going to happen, and those are the risks that have to happen to play football. But focusing on strengthening the muscles around the knee is really key. And you all probably know a lot about that, but I always, suggest that focusing more on prevention rather than pulling back during that time is more important. So that strengthening, particularly the hamstring muscles, because we tend to focus more on the quads and not as much on the hamstrings. So you can continue to compete and play the same way. Now, once entering the high hormone phase here in luteal, you'll see this list of different symptoms. There's a couple that I want to point out and talk about, but first, let me just point out that luteal is that gradual increase. So if we get back to the hormone for a second, you can see that. Remember, estrogen blue is the good hormone that does good things for you. So it goes up, it peaks right here before ovulation. Here's your Beyonce phase. And then it drops down, but it doesn't really have a negative effect on the dropping there. The progesterone, the purple line, is the one that's going to cause a lot of the symptoms that are unpleasant. So it increases gradually. So even in the luteal in this first part of the stage, you're not necessarily feeling those negative impacts. That starts to come later as it peaks. And then it comes in this premenstrual phase right here where it drops rapidly. So during the luteal phase, there's no reason why you can't continue to train and perform at high levels. Just it's important to keep in mind a few things. One of the things that I think is often overlooked is higher body temperature. So that progesterone hormone makes it more difficult for bodies to regulate their temperature. And that, of course, leads to fatigue and can cause pain and cramping, can cause headaches, can cause all these kinds of things. So, again, focusing on hydration and nutrition is really important for the physical care of your body, but also because it gives people a way to take action. It gives people some agency over what's happening. So, if you're focusing on, I'm going to keep myself hydrated, I'm going to make sure I'm getting good rest, I'm going to make sure I'm getting, enough protein or whatever it is, then that's a way that people can have some control and power and not be just kind of left reacting to what's happening to their bodies. Another one to point out during, in early luteal, it's fairly similar and it gradually increases to where we get to the premenstrual stage where those hormones drop, and that's where a lot of the worst sort of symptoms happen. One of the things I've learned recently about is that there's some difficult recovery. So muscle recovery works differently when our hormones are at that high level. And so that might mean more rest. That might mean adjusting some of the work you might be doing in the weight room, things like that. Um, so all of these symptoms can happen. They progress the further you get into luteal. Late luteal is definitely a time to focus on rest, hydration, nutrition. Low impact training is ideal during that time as it's possible. And the premenstrual phases, remember, you're having all of these potential symptoms that's contributing to the difficult feelings. But of course, again, everybody is different. Some people may have been blessed with a lucky circumstance of not having difficult menstrual cycles, while others are going to have much worse symptoms. We can come back to that. Please jot down any notes or questions you have on that. We're going to move on to a couple of other items. I get a lot of questions about hormonal contraceptives. Yes, a lot of athletes, particularly older athletes, will use hormonal contraceptives. What that does is takes those hormone lines and flattens them. So they prevent ovulation. It flattens those hormonal fluctuations. So that can be really good for some athletes. And some people will hop on and off contraceptives just to avoid having their period, during the World Cup or something like that. Those are very personal choices. There's no right answer for everyone, but it is important to know, that is an option, something that an athlete can discuss with their parent and their doctor. And it might be ideal for some, but for others, it might have negative side effects that outweigh the benefits. So it's a very personal decision. So I was just on the phone this morning with someone who was sharing that on her daughter's football team, soccer here in the US, a lot of the girls are not getting their regular periods. Back in my day when the big team when I was in college, I didn't play soccer, I didn't play football, I played basketball, but the 99ers, 1999 World Cup, it was a big thing. So back then we kind of thought missing your period was a badge of honor. That meant you were training so hard, you were so committed and dedicated that your body was reacting that way. We know now that that's not good. That actually leads to some long-term problems. Now for teenagers, they might have irregular periods. That's not abnormal, but if they've skipped like 3 periods in a row, that's something that they might need to check out with their doctor. So I think from a coaching perspective, you can share some of this information and I'll give you resources for how to do that. Um, and kind of leave that up to your student because a lot of the coaches I talk to, they don't want to overstep their bounds. I'm not saying you track people's periods. I'm suggesting that you give them that information and make sure that they know, if that is happening, then they should get help from a doctor. So missing periods for 3 months in a row is called amenorrhea, and that can be a sign of some deeper problems. On the other hand, if someone is having just debilitating menstruation, the bleeding or the pain makes it so that they can barely get out of bed, those kinds of things, they should also see a doctor. That is not normal that should happen. And they might have a case of endometriosis, which is to where the uterine lining is spreading to other parts of the body and causes a lot of pain. So any of those kinds of things we can educate young people on, you can educate parents on, and then without invading their privacy, give them this information and let them make their decisions from there. Another element that people talk a lot about is RED-S or female athlete triad. And that's the relationship between eating disorders among athletes, particularly young girls. Um, they feel a lot of awareness of their body and struggles with their body image at that age and adolescence. That can lead to disordered eating, menstrual health problems such as amenorrhea, missing their periods, and different injuries. So ACL tears and things like that. So you might see those terms. Female athlete triad is menstruation, eating disorders, and ACL tears. And RED-S is just stands for relative energy deficiency, and that's just how we're we're not giving enough nutrition to our bodies, particularly at different times of the phases of the cycle. And particularly because girls feel a pressure to stay thin and lose weight. But we actually need more energy. We need more fat on our bodies for it to function properly, especially for people who are active physically. Try to catch up here a little bit from that delay earlier. So I'll just share a few things that Anna found in her study. I'm not sure if she's back on, but she did a study with almost 500 participants from all around the world, and they had the same common symptoms that we've seen and talked about. And just I think it's important to see it in this kind of focus that you know um, people do agree that their menstrual cycle impacts their performance, and they also agree that it's mostly negative. That shouldn't be too surprising, but I think what's actually really surprising is how little we talk about it. I think that's striking to know it's affecting people in such a severe way and we don't really talk about it. And as coaches, you've gone through a lot of training and education, and this may be the first time you're even talking about menstruation in relation to sport. So on to coaches themselves and what they can do. You can see from this um, graph from that study that athletes do think it's important for coaches to understand, and they do think that coaches can help. So if the athletes are recognizing that you have the ability to help them and they want your help. When I had some workshops with athletes and coaches in the same room, we discovered that the athletes were afraid to ask the coaches because they didn't want to embarrass the coach. The coach was afraid to talk to the athlete because they didn't want to embarrass the athlete. So they're protecting each other. And that's, I think, a perfect example of like this, it's they care about each other. They don't want to hurt each other's feelings. They don't want to embarrass each other. But it leaves them in this stalemate because of the stigma, because of the taboo around menstruation. So we're going to have to break through that. I'm trying to give you some tools to do that. I think for coaches that are coaching young children, it's important to also kind of think about this as sort of a duty of care. Almost every workshop I've done, coaches have shared that there were incidents where a girl had a leaking accident during her sport. That can be really embarrassing and can cause that child to leave sport for the based on the humiliation of it. Yet it happens again and again and again. And we can't, sometimes these things happen. That's okay. But I think it's about creating an environment um, where the girls can feel safe asking for help when they need it. And sort of thinking about in that way, if you take that preventative approach to help educate and support, you might save some kids from having this embarrassing experience. I have sort of identified different ways and approaches that coaches have, and I put them in these sort of the 4 different types of talks. And if you think about it this way, we all want to be have the supportive and helpful way. We want to be knowledgeable. We want to be empathetic. We want to be supportive. Most people are in a supportive but not helpful category. So hopefully this education can get you out that not helpful to a little more helpful. Um, and that's because of lack of education. People just, coaches, parents don't feel equipped to be able to talk about menstruation. The other approaches I see are the shrug and run away, which is the coaches like, especially for males, they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. You just go do what you need to do. And then they walk away. The other one, more often from women, is the tough it out approach. Like, hey, women have been suffering from menstrual pains for millions of years. You can get over it and go play. Um, which can also be, in its own way, just as damaging, especially considering that, just because I'm a woman who's menstruating for decades doesn't mean my experience is the same as someone else. So this is a particular challenge for men who coach, and I have some questions, in particular that Harley sent me of men who are coaching. So I encourage you to ask any questions you have, and hopefully some of this material can address you in particular, because I understand it's not easy because you don't have the education and because you don't have that connection to the player. So we talked about that. So some tips for starting conversations. Another question I had was someone asking about how parents can help. And I think almost all of this material can also be applied for parents. I am a parent of 2 teenage girls. We talk about periods all the time in this house. And I understand the hesitations and the challenges, but you can do this. I would advise for coaches to inform parents or guardians about having any of these discussions. I think it's a good idea to ask for peer leaders, peer mentors. If you're in a club where you have maybe like a U16 team and a U10 or U12 team, maybe then they can work together on some of this. That can be really helpful. And I think, process wise, my biggest piece of advice is like get some material. I have these on my website. I have these resources on powertoplay.com. Here's a poster. You can print that out, put that up. This diagram, you can print that out and put that up in your locker room or share it to the girls. There's a ton of resources. One of the best education sources I found is a Scottish company called Hello Girls. Or, I'm sorry, Hey Girls. And these are cards that they have with all these period questions on it. They have brochures and materials. I've got a link to them in my website. That's them right there. Hey Girls UK. They have renewable products. They have reusable products and disposable products. They're all like sustainably sourced. So it's really good. Every time you buy a pack, then they give away a pack to people in need. I have no affiliation with them. I'm not getting I'm not a YouTube influencer for them, but I just really like their products. The other thing I think they do really nicely is they have a program called Pads for Dads, which is education on periods that are targeted to men, adult men. And they also have a Hey Boys section. So one of the questions I got was from someone saying that they had a mixed team of boys and girls. They wanted to know how to deal with the questions from boys. Absolutely 100%. Send them to Hey Boys or send them to Hey Girls and look up the Hey Boys section, and you'll see some really good resources there. I'm not interested. I'm not able to like reproduce everything. They've already done a really good job of it. So I'm just going to direct you to them. And I do think it's so helpful to give people some material, give a brochure, send them to a website, ask them to look at it, and then maybe create, like you can just do a Google form, like an anonymous form, and have them write in questions so that it's anonymous. Those kinds of things can be really useful because the brochure takes it off of your shoulders to have to say everything perfectly. So if someone else has designed it, you can use my material, you can use Hey Girls, iRise International, Adidas has a brochure, Puma, Nike. There's a lot of different sources you can look up and see what you prefer. Send them there so that we have a base, um, kind of foundation of knowledge and language. Give them an opportunity to ask questions anonymously, and then try to have discussions. I think those are the best starting points, and then also it takes the burden off the coach and it gives you all common language, and that information can be shared with parents as well. I also think it's important to stock products in the locker rooms and changing rooms. Up in Scotland, we made had that big movement where we have products now available in schools and universities and public buildings. I know a lot of that has carried over into England as well. So that's an important way. One suggestion too is to put some products out and put some material next to the products. So you could put a basket. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated. You get a basket from, you know, Asda or something and just fill it with some pads and tampons and then put some brochures from Hey Girls in there. And bam, you've done a really good job of setting up the environment for your athletes. It's also about just acknowledging, it's a concern, it's something that's affecting them and you want to help. I would also leave multiple time for either lessons or discussions. Don't just say the issue one time and then check it off your list. Come back to it. It's important because as people go through different cycles, they'll have different experiences and they might have different questions. So if you send out some information and have them do an anonymous question form, in January, then in March, someone might have had some experiences that they'd have totally different questions. So I think it's a good idea to come back and revisit those. So those are just, and then those are just some of the resources I have. And then I think also sometimes it's good to see these stories in detail. I'm working on this for a different project, but I pulled out a few stories. Paula Radcliffe, British runner, some of your athletes might know her, broke the marathon record while on her period. If you can run a marathon and break the record while on your period, like we can do anything. And then there's just different stories about how women did different things or teams did different things to overcome their period and help them succeed at the Olympics and golf and World Cup, all of these different examples. All right, the last thing, and then I'll move into questions, is a bit about creating friendly environments. I already talked about having products available. There's a lot in the news. I don't know if you've seen this, but around kit and uniforms. So many football teams in particular trading out those white shorts to get dark colored shorts that make people feel more confident and comfortable when they're performing. I was just interviewed last week on a story about Wimbledon changing their uniform requirements. I don't know if you saw that, but famous Wimbledon with their white clothing is now allowing people to wear colored underwear so that girls and women feel less exposed if they're having their period during the tournament. I think it is important for as much as possible to get input from the players themselves about what kind of kit and uniforms make them feel confident and comfortable and are period friendly. A lot of times girls teams will just get the leftovers from the boys, or they just order the same things and then they're a boys cut that doesn't have room for breasts or doesn't have hips, things like that. I mean, football's a little bit easier because you're not in completely fitted uniforms like gymnastics or swimwear. But simple things like changing out the white shorts can make a huge difference. And I've had my favorite thing that's happening now is with all these changes, especially now we'll see it on display in the World Cup, is they have coaches ask me, they'll tell me, well, my club has always worn white shorts, they won't change it. And now you all can point to Wimbledon. If Wimbledon can change their rules, I mean, I can't think of a sport event that's more steeped in ritual and tradition. If Wimbledon can change the rules, your sport club can change the rules around uniforms. If Manchester City, if all these teams in the U.S. Professional Soccer League, all these national teams going to the World Cup, they're changing out of their white shorts. Your club can surely do that. And not only is it, you're not only you able to do that, but also think about what that means for the kids. If a professional athlete on their way to Wimbledon or the World Cup is feeling nervous about playing in white shorts, how do you think the average 14-year-old girl feels? She's probably very nervous. And if this is something that makes her feel more confident and keeps her in that sport, it's definitely worth it. So I think this is a good time to advocate for those changes. I'll just quickly touch on some of these other things around sport clothing. So you can look for there's new period leggings and underwear that can be used as primary forms of catching and capturing menstrual blood, but they also are really good as backups. So a lot of people will have, they'll use pads or tampons, but then they feel nervous about a leak because you're in a game, you can't just go run out to the toilet. So maybe they wear period underwear or period leggings as a backup option to prevent from any leaking. So those are available from all kinds of different brands now. It's not exactly on periods, but I just want to point out, I have my sports bra book out here. Sports bras are very important and necessary gear, especially for teenagers who aren't used to having breasts and aren't used to having breast pain, which can increase during the premenstrual and menstrual period. So if you can, there are different programs that will help make sure that people have sports bras. That's a really good thing to think about too. Changing rooms, making sure they're clean and private and available. I've also had people talk about, especially with young kids, not having toilets on the pitch or available at events. It's really important to advocate for toilet facilities and make sure you have access. There's also different ways of helping kids and players cope with period pains, everything from heating pads. These period patches are like pain patches that can be put across the lower abdomen to help with some pain, or maybe across the lower back if there's lower back aches during the period. Those doesn't solve all the problems for everybody, but it can help other people. Some people feel well. And I think it's also a mental thing, just having a sense that you're doing something to help improve your situation. I would also say just to be careful that on the road, if you're traveling somewhere, that there's a woman chaperone and that there are menstrual products carried with you. I think most coaches are doing that these days, having that just in case bag ready, so in case someone gets their period. Okay, we made it despite some challenges. So I'll turn it back to Harley. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry that happened. Um, but I'm eager to see what questions you have, or if anybody wants to share any stories or send questions.
Yeah, just take yourself off mute if you want to say something, or put your hand up, or type in the chat.
I've got a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it,
Absolutely.
Chloe.
So you mentioned in the luteal phase, obviously, that there's blood sugar instability. Does that tend to mean that there will be more impact on those players that are maybe diabetic at that point of their cycle?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. What instability?
It says on the diagram around blood sugar instability.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
That's right. Yeah, would that have a bigger impact on diabetic players during that phase of their cycle? And if so, like, how might that impact their performance? Like, is it more likely to drop? Is it more likely to kind of peak?
Yeah. Um, I'm I'm not sure about the diabetic element. I'm not a physiologist or a medical doctor, but I imagine that that would make things more challenging, more difficult. The blood sugar instability is about how the hormones change how sugar is processed. And so most often you would have low blood sugar. And it's also there's all sorts of complicated things that happen with the blood cells during different phases of the cycle. So when they're vacillating and and low blood pressure can happen. So it gets really complicated. Do you have an athlete who's diabetic?
Yeah, we do, and I've also worked with some in the past. That's why it just, I suppose, sort of piqued my interest.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, I'm a big fan of granola bars, just as a mom of teenagers, like, because they'll get busy. And I think we have to remember too that some of the challenges kids are coming from school, they don't have a lot of time, they don't have a lot of control over some of their lives. So I think absolutely having some healthy resources available for when people are feeling that blood sugar instability at any time of the cycle is really good. If you have someone with particular needs, I would highly recommend this book by Stacy Sims. She is an actual medical expert, and most of the symptoms that I've drawn on in that diagram come from her work. She and she's the consultant for Nike on this topic. But there's like, I mean, everything she goes through, like point by point of all the things that are happening and how that can affect people, and ways to combat that. So that's a really good resource for those kinds of details. But I don't know specifically, I can't speak specifically to diabetes. I just imagine it would make it worse. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go
Are
for
the
it.
slides with the links to the resources going to be made available, or something similar to the people that attended the call? Because there's a couple of things to pass back to clubs and things, particularly around an emergency kit, or for want of a better word, just to make chairman and people like that aware that it's something that we could be doing and keeping an eye on around our
Yeah,
facilities.
absolutely. The
Great.
yeah, I can share, like, we can just PDF the slides, and I'll share that. That's fine. I would just ask that you use it for your own personal, and that, don't go out and start your own power to play
Oh,
period, but I would
crikey.
be happy to share that.
I coach 12-year-old kids, and I'm not looking forward to the conversations. 11, sorry, my daughter tells me as we just come off a football training pitch and she's listening in.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think using some of those resources is really, really helpful. There's a project that came out of Liverpool, John Moores University, called the Justin Casey Bag, and they that's in the link, the resources that I have in the that I just put in the chat. So that can be a really good one. But it's also like, it doesn't have to be complicated. I would say some different types of pads, like light, medium, heavy, some tampons, and some granola bars. And that's a pretty sufficient box or bag to keep with you.
Just for my knowledge, I didn't even know there was period shorts available and leggings. So it's just
Mm-hmm. Yep. Those are really good. And I'm not getting any payback or anything from Hey Girls, but as a county club, you might contact them about getting some resources, because they do work with like school groups and things like that. So if you contact Celia, I can't think of her last name. She founded Hey Girls with her daughter. She was a single mom trying to get by and really struggled when everybody was getting their period. And so she's got a lot of reusable products and the buy one, give one program. So those are really, really good resources.
thank you.
Yes, SL has a question.
Hi, Harley knows me. Sheila, I've done girls football for quite a few years now, so I've met quite a few challenges. We encourage all our coaches to actually carry some pads in their first aid kit. And also, I mean, if we've got female coaches as well, I think girls sort of relate to having that conversation more with a female coach initially, and knowing that this someone there that actually understands it. A lot of the challenges I think we've had over the years is mainly facilities as well. Although you might be able to get to a toilet, it may not have a sanitary bin. So it's, and then that causes another problem, because there's sort of, so I think you've got to sort of like preempt a lot of things that could happen, and trying to avoid it, especially with the younger girls when it sort of first happens. I was even on holiday once where a mum rang me and said her daughter was at a tournament and had just started her periods. Could I help? And I was like, I can't. I'm on holiday. But again, maybe sort of putting some information out to, especially saying girls team, to mums that the club is there and is supportive of it, and they can maybe have that conversation as well with their daughters off the pitch as well, so they know they've got somebody. But again, facilities is a bit of a challenge as well, because they don't always have the bins. So maybe take something that you can dispose of things discreetly as well.
Dog poo bags.
Yeah, perfect.
Dog poo bags are really good
things
for
like
that. You can get the little roll, it doesn't take up much space. Just have the roll of dog poo bags and that'll do the trick.
But that's just probably a little bit of advice I could pass over just through experiences. Just be prepared for it and try and work with the parents and the girls, but especially female coaches.
And I think one of the things I've heard for male coaches, definitely having a female assistant coach, or maybe if you're a coach in the U12s and the U14 coach is female, maybe she could help. For smaller clubs, it gets a little frustrating because there may only be one female coach and now she's in charge of anything related to women. But maybe engaging like moms as help, and especially for those things like traveling, just making sure that there's some female adult that people can go to and feel comfortable with. I think that's a good idea. And that's not to say, again, that men can't have those conversations. I think they can, and I think we should try to blow open the stigma so that men can. But at the same time, if it's more comfortable for the girls at this stage, we need to get them to that point, especially the younger ones. I think we find that like 17, 18-year-olds, they're going to be a lot more comfortable maybe just kind of sharing their experiences. But when it's first happening, it really is confusing and embarrassing and scary for girls, especially if they don't really know what's going on. So they might feel more comfortable with a mom-like figure to talk to.
I mean, I think most male coaches, although they probably deal with it in their maybe with their partners, I think it's because a different problem when it's their daughter or someone else's daughter, and that I think that's what the education needs to be around a little bit in clubs as well, is how they deal with that. Most, like you say, older women, teenagers upwards, learn to accept it and can talk to each other and things, but it's dads and daughters maybe.
Yeah, I know. Well, and my husband has learned plenty from me and from having two daughters. But I think that's also why using resources is a really good idea. Just sharing some of those web links to your team, or bringing in some brochures or posters, and that gives them some information, gives them some talking points where nobody has to actually verbalize it and feel embarrassed. And I just think that's a really helpful way to start those conversations. There was something else I was going to say on that, and then it just went poof. I hate when that happens. Does anybody else have a question? Yeah, John.
Hey, first of all, thank you very much. Coming into this, I didn't actually know what I needed to know. And that was a hell of a lot of information, which is going to be both useful as a coach and as a dad of 3 girls. So thank you for that. I must have blacked out with something. I know that Rob asked, but did you say there was going to be a copy of this meeting available?
Harley. Yeah, I have recorded it, so yeah, I can send out. You have recorded it.
You're good.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, I'll
wonderful.
send out a copy to you all.
If you like, Sarah, we can edit out the bit where you spend coughing.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is happening?
Yeah. So really, I just wanted to say thank you. It's given me a lot of good ideas on how to address the situation. I mean, all my goals are sort of just the year before it's due to start happening at the moment. So I'm just apprehensive about it in that respect. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think, well, so 12, the average age or the median age is 12, does happen sometimes sooner. So it is a good idea to, to talk to them or to get them some information early on. And I think, see, no, it just went away again. I had something else I was going to say to that, and it's gone away. If I think of it, I'll send it to Harley. We can share. Does
Anyone
anybody else have a
else?
question? Oh, I know. I was going to say around facilities, I had someone recently tell me that especially with the younger kids, they were at a different pitch, not like their club pitch. And there was a toilet, but they didn't have access. They didn't have a key to it. And they had to fight for literally like 2 years or something like that to get the key. And so I don't know if anyone's in that situation, but I would just say, just encourage you to really advocate for that. And as needed, point to some of these upper level, football clubs and Wimbledon and all that stuff and say like, they're acknowledging that this is a challenge for professional athletes. So we should be able to do these small things to support young athletes, and hopefully that will help them stay in the sport. Does anybody else have a question?
Anyone else?
No.
No, it doesn't look like it. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I guess I can stop sharing, huh? Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Am I coughing up a lung or something? It's great. And I love doing these because I get to be in touch with real life coaches who are actually out there doing it. And I hope that everybody walks away with a little more knowledge and a little more confidence to go forward, and some with your resources. And especially, for those of you, like for the guys that are out here coaching, thank you for being here. And like I said, to start, it's okay if you don't feel like you know much, because there's no, there was no pathway for you to learn this. And for the women who are coaches, hopefully you feel a little more empowered too. Not only, I've noticed too in teaching this, like I start to notice my own menstrual cycle issues and start to pay attention to that a bit more. And so it can be helpful in that way too. Okay. And feel free to contact me. My email and stuff is all on the website, so you can contact me if you have questions or any follow-up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think everyone's
Okay.
definitely found it useful, me included. So, yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
I'll
Awesome.
let you all get off and enjoy the rest of your Monday evening here. I don't know what time it is with you.
Yeah. It's 3 o'clock over here. So I'm going to go take the dog out for a walk. You all enjoy your tea and have a good night. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.